think where we are in Latin America and where we're going. Now, I'm not going to talk about the crisis and Latin America and Asia over the crisis, nor am I going to talk about comparisons of Latin America and Asia. What I really want to do is to draw some conclusions about growth in Latin America, looking at the tremendous difference in results over the region in growth rates. Several people have pointed out the heterogeneity of experience in this region, and in fact, it's kind of a perfect laboratory test case of sort of what seems to work and what doesn't seem to work across the region. It's obviously tremendously satisfying to find that Latin America returned to fairly rapid growth after year 2000. But like Liliana, I'm still a little dissatisfied because Latin America is still losing ground relative to Asia. And if you take the weighted average rather than the simple average, as Klaus said, in fact, the growth rates are really not only are they losing ground relative to Asia, but they're not as fast as they were in the period 1960 and 1970 because of the performance, the different performance in Brazil and Mexico in particular. I mean, the performance is better, but I don't think it's really great. And I'm old enough to sort of remember in fact, I started my professional career in Brazil during the Brazilian miracle when Brazil was growing at 6, 7, 8% a year for 15 years. So it's frustrating to find that the region has fallen behind and has not done particularly well, really since 1980, and there's obviously lots of reasons for that. But in any case, in the little paper, I just underlined the heterogeneity of results. There are 4 countries in the region, Brazil, Mexico, Guatemala, and Paraguay, whose performance is far worse than it was from 1960 to 1980. And there's another 4 or 5, they're better than 1960 to 1980, but they're still growing at less than 3% a year per capita. So there's not enormously a great performance. And there are a few countries, happily this is one of them, Chile, Peru, and I guess I would also look at Costa Rica and Panama. These are countries which have found a way to grow pretty rapidly since 1980, and we can learn something from that performance. But what I come down with is that there are serious growth problems in at least 8 countries in the region. And that's the point of heterogeneity. There are 6 small economies, 4 in Central America, plus Paraguay and Bolivia, that really they just really have not got a successful growth strategy. They're not growing very fast. It's not entirely obvious why, but in what's relevant to this conference, agriculture is a very important sector in at least 4 of them, and probably 5 of them. These are countries that don't have a lot of minerals. And so one of their natural resource base is going to depend on agriculture and agricultural development, and they haven't been very successful so far. So this is what I elected, what I wanted to do. I've written a paper which you can find on the IFPRI website, in which I basically said, let's do a kind of a best practice methodology. Let's compare in any way we can successes and failures. First thing we have to do is to divide countries according to whether we think of them as successful or not. And so what I said is, let me define as a successful country one that has had at least 5 consecutive years of rapid sustainable growth of over 3% per year per capita income growth, okay? And there are about 9 or possibly 10, depending on how you handle the Dominican Republic, who have managed to do that. But there are 8 countries, so let me call those the success stories. And then there are the countries, there are 8 of them that haven't had any period of rapid sustainable growth since year 2000, and in many cases all the way since the 1970s. They've never had a period in which they grew for 5 consecutive years at least 3% a year. That is not a very good, that's not a very good performance. Now then what I want to do is to compare several indicators that we think have something to do with rapid sustainable growth. Either within the countries over time, between say the 1960-80 period and the post-2000 period, or across countries after year 2000. The non-rapid growing countries against the rapid growing countries. What's different? What's different in terms of investments, exports, imports, the capacity to import, or the composition of growth? So basically that's what I did. Very simple methodology, but nonetheless I think it's instructive. And here's what we find, or here's what I think we found. First of all, investment. The investment share, it turns out, it does just what you'd expect it to do. The investment share rose in the rapidly growing countries. It rose by about 6 percentage points relative to GDP, and it fell by about 2.5% in the countries which didn't have rapid sustainable growth. The growth per investment rate went up in the countries that were growing rapidly and went down in the countries that weren't growing rapidly. In other words, some of them invested quite a lot, but they didn't get much for it. Exports grew in every country, but they grew faster in export share. They grew faster in the non-rapidly growing countries than they did in the rapidly growing countries, but that's really because the growth rate in the unsuccessful countries was so much lower. And the import share, it grew faster in the rapidly growing countries than it did in the non-rapidly growing countries. It's sort of goodbye import substitution. The rapidly growing countries became more open and they invested more than the other ones. And that really, those are kind of clearly, or look like they're clearly significant differences. I thought that the capacity to import itself would be an important determinant. I defined that as the foreign exchange earnings from exports plus capital inflows plus foreign investment plus remittances less payments on foreign debt. And it turns out to be a key determinant of growth, particularly in small economies where you really have to generate foreign exchange in order to grow fast. And it grew far faster in the rapidly growing countries than it did in the less rapidly growing countries. Why? Well, partly it's because exports went up. Partly it's because they attracted foreign investment. Partly it's because they paid off their foreign debt. It didn't have a huge overhanging debt burden, as Sebastian was pointing out. And so, their interest rate and their interest payments were a good deal lower. Now, then I looked at sources of growth. It is sort of a composition analysis of sources of growth using a kind of a Keynesian decomposition. It turns out that foreign trade contributes a lot more in the rapidly growing countries while exports go up and imports are not as much of a problem. It contributes a lot more in the rapidly growing country and a lot less to the total amount of growth in the slow growing countries. In the slow growing countries, the big drivers of growth are consumption and government spending, whereas in the rapidly growing countries, it's investment and it's exports. And I think those are a clear and important difference. In other words, my conclusion is that the successful countries like Chile, like Peru, and like Costa Rica, they found an export niche and they exploited it. They invested a lot, they exploited the export niche and have succeeded. They raised investment, and as Liliana pointed out, importantly, they also raised saving. They raised domestic saving, the financing of this investment. In the less successful countries, they got growth, but they got it from consumption, they got it from government, they didn't get it from foreign trade. And right here you can see, and particularly in Central America, the role of remittances. I mean, they basically, what growth they got was an awful lot of that came from remittances, and that's not going to be, probably not going to be, a very important source of growth in the future. For the problem countries, let's face it, they need a way to promote to promote agricultural development and diversification, because a lot of them really depend strongly on agriculture. They don't have minerals. Many of these countries, like Honduras, Nicaragua, the Dominican Republic, and Paraguay, they have high investment. And so we also have to figure out, why does their investment generate so little growth in these countries? It's not that they're not investing, it's that they're investing, but they don't get much out of it. There are other countries that aren't investing very much, like Brazil and Guatemala and El Salvador and Mexico. They've been the subject of some studies. How can we increase the investment and the savings rate in those countries? That's a separate problem. But for these other countries, the small countries, they've got to figure out a way to develop their agriculture and to exploit an export niche. And unfortunately, in this world in which the Chinese and the Asians have shown the way, that's going to be very difficult, much more difficult than it was in the period 60 to 80. Thank you.